Last week we talked about insulation and blowing insulation into attics. And I saved this next segment for a special person. I wanted somebody that actually knew a lot more about it than I do, and that is foam insulation. I've had a lot of experience with foam being done correctly, but I've also had some experience with foam being done incorrectly and some of the pitfalls that can happen when people get talked into using it in the wrong situation. So our next guest is the market division president of Texas Insulation, and Abe Nevarez, and we are going to talk foam insulation. So welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Alex.
Yeah,
My pleasure.
It's good to have you here. Now, I talked last week about blowing in insulation and some of the things that I don't like about some insulation. Like I talked about rock wool and why I don't like rock wool. I don't like it because what it's made from mostly and what it can do when it gets in your lungs. But our new building now, the way we're building houses with foam, a lot of foam, it has really changed the dynamics of the interior of a house. But it's got to be done right.
Yes.
And if it's done wrong, it can be an absolute disaster.
That's correct.
Okay, so let me get this over here where I can hear you a little better. There you go. Here you go.
Is that good?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay.
Thanks. So you speak softly. You must have kids.
I have 4 children and a wife.
So you speak softly, but you know how to growl.
I sure do.
Yeah, you got a growler down there with 4 kids.
Yes, sir.
Tell us about your foam insulation. There's 2 different kind of foams.
Yeah, so basically the most commonly used terms is open cell, closed cell foam.
And so let's discuss what that is.
Okay, so open cell foam is what's most commonly used in our region. Closed cell foam is most commonly used up north in different climate zones.
This is because of warm versus cold.
Exactly.
Or what we're trying to, like we always tell people, we're down here, we're battling the cold, the hot, and up north, you're battling the cold.
That's correct. So there are different climate zones throughout the country. Ours is a warm climate here in Dallas, here in Texas. So open cell is the most common product used here, although we do use closed cell in metal buildings, wine rooms, crawl spaces.
So closed cell
seems
to me would be something that is a lot denser, and so there's probably a different reason that you would use it, maybe in addition to an insulation value.
Correct. So closed cell has a couple other attributes that open cell doesn't have, meaning, so they're both good insulators, they're both air barriers, but closed cell gives you, it's also a moisture barrier, vapor barrier, and it also gives you structural strength. So
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so those are a couple added benefits to using a closed cell versus an open cell.
But for the purpose of just insulation and air infiltration, one of the things that I love about foam is that you get both. But there's certain times when you have a much better benefit in a residence than other times, and one is the thickness of the wall.
Correct.
Okay, explain that. Is foam something good to use in a 2x4 wall? That's the question.
Yes, foam is definitely a great insulator, but it's also an air barrier all by itself, which no other product on the market is. Okay, so some of the benefits there, I'll give you an example. If you have a 2x6 wall construction, any other product, you have to fill the cavity full per code because it's not an air barrier. So the drywall would be your air barrier. Spray foam, you're allowed to maybe put 3.5 inches of foam in that same cavity, and it performs just as well or better as if you had filled the cavity with any other product.
And so there's an R value. Explain it to us, the R value of foam versus, say, fiberglass bats.
Well, as far as R value goes, there's some similarities, meaning so they're both about a 3.8 per inch R value. So you're not necessarily gaining R value when you switch to foam. What you're gaining is a better airtight, a better air seal, because the product itself is an air barrier. It's applied as a liquid, and it expands into any little crevices, anything that you have on the
Well,
exterior shell.
in infiltration, is, as we've learned over the years by even some of our more horrible mistakes we made building houses in the 70s, where we put plastic and we did it for the same reason. For the most part, we were trying to create an air barrier because our houses, explain to us how our houses leak air from the outside typically.
Well, there's a lot of ways for houses to leak. We call them leaky houses. But the idea is that every house has what we call air changes per hour, right? So the more air changes per hour the home has, the leakier the house is. So the idea is to try to minimize the air changes per hour. And what that means is, how many times does the inside air of your home get replaced with outside air, right? So again, the leakier the house, the more times the air changes happen.
In old houses, the houses I grew up remodeling that were built out of wood, wood walls, floors, everything was wood, and they well, it was just like being on the out. Though we didn't even have air conditioning, I mean, what can I say? So, been around a while. And so that air exchange was no big issue back then. I mean, it was what it was, right? And every time you open the door or a window, and people don't do a whole lot of window opening anymore, but every time you open a door, you bring in, you have a little air exchange right there.
Correct.
But nowadays we have these houses that we just live in. We shut the door, or we may, right now when it's about 100 or 100 degrees every day, like it is this time of year, you may not go outside unless you just have to, right? So
Yes.
You're sitting inside this house. It's got foamed walls. It might have might be totally encapsulated in foam, and you have to have some air exchange.
Correct.
What happens if you don't?
Well, every newer houses now do have ventilation, but it's mechanical. It's brought in through the HVAC system, through the furnace. So what you want is the exchange to be mechanically done. It's controlled. How many air changes per hour? Again, having too much unwanted air from the outside, that brings in pollutants from the outside. If you have allergies.
And if you don't have enough air exchange, you have unwanted air on the inside, from the inside, from us.
Correct.
Because we're all full of you-know-what, and it floats around in the air, and eventually it catches up with you.
Correct. So I think that the important part is for people to understand that there's several components. Your home, we look at it as a system, and there's multiple components that work together to make it perform efficiently. Ventilation happens to be one of those components that we look at.
Now, one of the things I really wanted to talk to you about today is I've heard we've all heard horror stories about foam gone wrong. It ain't the foam, it's the installation of the foam. There's certain places that certain houses in particular, particularly really old houses, you don't want foam. The house isn't built. So what Abe was talking about the system of the house, if the house is built, or if you're doing an addition, and you build the addition to be foamed, then fine. What that means is you address all these air leakage issues from the outside, moisture leakage issues from the outside, roof leakage issues, because you don't want that foam getting wet. That's the main thing. And not because it's going to hurt the foam, because it won't dry out, and you start having mold and rot issues if you have water leakage into it.
That's correct. So there's a lot of different possibilities that could happen if you use a contractor that doesn't pay attention to the house as a system.
So if somebody has now I've been addressing this a lot lately, because this happens a lot of times when we have certain conditions in the economy and in the building environment where a lot of people go off the books and start deciding they want to start their little business. I see it all the time. All builders, all contractors do. And there's plenty of homeowners out there that are going to, you know, kind of be a sucker for that cheap price. And they'll call me and they'll go, hey, I've talked to some guy came in here and he said that we need to foam the attic. Let's just, you know, Alex, I know you're telling me to blow in fiberglass or whatever, but yeah, I want to foam it because that sounds really cool. Let's just foam that seal. And I go, no, there's a whole lot of things that you have to consider before you start completely changing how your house is insulated.
That's very true.
Let's
Yes.
have your advice on that.
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, you have to look at the house as a system, right? So one of the first things that we would do when we show up to a project is learn the project, ask a lot of questions. When was the project built? You know, the building built? Has there been any issues, fires, leaking, anything going on? Is there access to do foam? But one of the main things that we always look at is the HVAC system because that has a direct correlation with the insulation. You're going from a typical vented attic system to a non-vented system, and that really changes the dynamics of how the systems work, how the components work
How
together.
the components work, particularly the ones that use heat or
Correct.
gas,
Yeah,
natural
heat-
gas.
Exactly. So I always recommend before you do spray foam, you have to involve a professional HVAC contractor in the conversation because going from a vented to a non-vented system is going to impact the house as a whole. A couple things that could happen is all of a sudden your house is more efficient, so your unit is oversized, and that creates what we call short cycling. It means it cools the house so fast, but it doesn't run long enough to draw the humidity out of the air.
Which is one of the keys to air conditioning, to a modern air conditioning system is, like Abe is saying, it's a system, and the house is a system. We've gone from a house being basically like we built them 100 years ago, which was stick frame walls and ceiling, and the air comes in, the air goes. We weren't thinking about all that stuff. And then all of a sudden we put these forced air systems in, and we're forcing this cold, moist air into this environment that's got to control that, because we found in the 80s and 90s. Now, we started putting central air in houses in the early 80s, before you were born, when I was a young guy. And it was a big deal, but we didn't know anything about it. We're just putting it in there. And people would say, I want to be able to hang meat in my living room, man. I want that baby cold in the middle of August, man. I want a shiver. And I'd go, and the AC guy would say, sure, man, I'll just throw an extra couple of tons of air in there. Don't you even worry about that. Well, he didn't know.
Right.
You
They
know?
didn't know any better.
And guess what happens about 5 or 6 years later? Hey, man, I got this mold everywhere, and my system's not working. There's water dripping off my lights.
Yes. We actually see that a lot.
Sure you do, because we put in insulated windows. That when I was a young guy, we didn't have insulated windows. We added storm windows, and we created insulated windows. You know, the only people that had double pane glass were commercial windows. We didn't have them in residential. Anyway, all of this evolved over time to where now we're building these really efficient homes. And by efficient, what we mean is maybe foamed walls, maybe a foamed rafters or attic floor, and then they're built on top of a slab. But if you happen to have a pier and beam, and particularly if it's an older house, be very careful about foaming underneath it. There's a certain way to do it that's right. And trust me, I've gone under them and they're completely rotted out, because even bat insulation, any kind of insulation under a pier and beam house, be very, very careful how you do that. Anyway, that's a whole nother show. And so our discussion about to our homeowners that are watching this, and somebody that comes in and wants to just kind of willy-nilly add foam.
One of the main things I would tell a homeowner is know who you're dealing with. Make sure it's a reputable contractor. Make sure you can get some references. They can provide, other jobs that they've done. If they're not asking you all these questions, like I mentioned earlier, checking the HVAC system, inspecting the attic, you'll know right away. If somebody shows up and says, "Oh yeah, let's just foam the attic," you probably don't want to do business with that person. They
Yeah.
might not know what they're doing.
You're making a major change, and it's an environmental change, so it could be dangerous. And so you have to really think through these things. I really appreciate you coming in today. I really do.
It's been my pleasure.
It's been really a lot of fun having you here. And so, folks, if you have any questions, give these guys a call. And they're a fantastic company, and they're actually a national company. They've got offices in Dallas and Houston and Texas. Do you have any more in Texas?
We're going to expand here over the next couple of years is the plan. We'll have
that's
locations
good.
in Austin, San Antonio. And
Fantastic,
Yes, sir.
fantastic. That's great. Stay tuned. We're going to be right back with another segment of Remodel Revolution.